All right, I think we're all set, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. All right. Well, thank you to John for sorting out our technical difficulties and for putting this together. My name is Rachel Fest, and I'm a specialist in pedagogy at SUNY Oneonta. I've been taking the lead on our AI programming there, not because I'm an expert in any way. I come from an English background, but because I've just been really curious about this disruptive technology, and I've been reading around in it widely and putting together from our faculty center some programs to help our faculty adapt to the changes that we're seeing. So this is a version of a presentation and workshop that I've done a couple of times on our campus that I wanted to bring to this setting. So I actually wanted to start with folks in the room, and if you're online, you can weigh in the chat as well. I want to know, can you raise your hand if you do currently have an AI policy in your course? Okay, we've got a couple. Raise your hand if you do not have an AI policy in your course, but you want to have an AI policy in your course. Okay, great. For those who do have these policies, I wanted to just start by hearing where you're coming from. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a sentence or two about what that policy is, what are you telling students or asking students right now? Please. Mm-hmm. 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 Excellent. Right, right, absolutely. Right, great. Okay, that's a great start. Maybe we'll hear from one more on your current policy. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we cannot hear what people are saying.
You're not able to hear the
No,
comments. I'll go ahead and repeat them back.
thank you.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, we have a great spectrum here, and it's one that we're going to be circling back to in this session. We started, if you couldn't hear us online, with a philosophy faculty member talking about trying to prevent students from using it in the case of certain assignments or encouraging them or allowing them to use it as a tool in others. And then we had, was it ed tech? Web, and then we had a web tech instructor who was encouraging students to use it, maybe requiring them to use it and helping them become familiar with certain tools. So we're definitely going to move across that spectrum today as we talk. I'm going to briefly just talk about why having a policy is significant. We'll talk a little bit about how to get started, give you some tips for crafting that policy, and go over a couple of questions to consider. And then in the second part, I have handed out some sample policies online. I'm going to show a QR code a little later that will bring you to those sample policies. You can also use the QR code that is currently up on the screen to access these slides. Even if you're in the room, please feel free to access the slides using this QR code. I have some links to different resources throughout the presentation that you might want to circle back to later. So this will take you to the slides now. If you're online and you go to the slides here, you can also scroll ahead to get to this handout with some sample policies that we'll talk about later. So we're going to look at some of these approaches and examples and talk a bit at the end, hopefully have some time to begin to just draft or even just gather your thoughts in terms of the policy that you might want to implement in your class. And if you already have a policy, there might be concerns or questions that we talk about that encourage you to update or add to that policy that you already have. Okay. So in terms of why to include a policy in your syllabus, many universities, not just across the SUNY system, but more broadly, are privileging faculty freedom and autonomy in the AI space, and they are resisting having a top-down policy on AI. So that makes it even more important for us as faculty to give students some guidance on this. As we saw in the last presentation with Billy, students are reporting that they're using AI for everything, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that they're using it to copy and paste. You know, they're putting in your prompt and then they're plopping that into a Word document, although I'm sure you've seen that as well. But they're using it to paraphrase, to read, to summarize, to outline, to brainstorm. In the last session, we saw that they were using it to organize their calendars, and we thought we would like to do that too. So the links here, at least one of them goes to a really good episode of The Daily, which is the New York Times podcast, where they interview students, many of them from elite university settings, but they have folks from other places too. And students are they're explaining how they use it, right? They might be using it to summarize Plato for them, right? If you've asked them to read that in your class. So it has a wide range of applications. And in the classroom setting, this means that being explicit about your expectations becomes really important. I've seen faculty on our campus who, come the end of the semester, are assigning final papers. They're seeing a lot of ChatGPT usage, and they haven't talked about that or, you know, given students a guide to how to think about that in their class yet. And then they're having these interactions that can be difficult, right? That can create just negative or difficult interactions with students. So being explicit about your expectations up front, talking about it right away and throughout the semester is going to help you just build that positive classroom community that's so important to a course. The other thing that I really like to stress to our faculty, it was perfect that we already heard this right off the bat, that we have very different approaches across the university. These are depending heavily on your discipline, your department, the way your discipline imagines its relationship to the private sector or to work after college, right? And so I've had some faculty who say, I'm just telling students to use it without even asking them to cite it. And that's fine in my class, right? We're seeing a lot of adoption in business, in ed tech, right? In a variety of those settings. Then I'm hearing from my home field, English, right? Philosophy, history, certain other disciplines where the skills of reading and writing kind of undergird the basics. And faculty are saying there, I don't want it in my classroom. They cannot use it. It's plagiarism. So if you're a student in this kind of, you know, liminal time when AI has disrupted things, but not everyone has decided yet how they're going to be approaching it, you're confused, right? Because you're like, okay, my philosophy professor said I can never use this. My ed tech professor is requiring me to use it without citation. So helping students navigate those confusing waters, I see as really important to us at this time. So hopefully you're sold on a policy, which it sounded like most folks were even coming in. So a couple of tips on just how to get started. And I'm going to be a little information heavy in the first half. Hopefully we'll move to conversation at a nice clip here. So I definitely recommend just reviewing those academic integrity policies for your institution as you get started. At SUNY Oneonta, for instance, our Office of Community Standards believes that AI is covered under our existing academic integrity policy, right? They are, I heard, planning to update that policy for the fall to include a certain kind of AI usage. But again, it's tricky because some professors are embracing and using it in a range of ways. So just taking a look at that policy again and thinking about how yours complements and interacts with that policy is really key. If you haven't already, and I think most people here with us likely have, you want to experiment with AI tools that students are likely to use, and you want to review your assignments to consider how students might be engaging with AI for those assignments. That means not just looking at, it does mean putting your actual prompt into the AI if you're assigning an essay. It also means if you're assigning things like reading comprehension questions, asking it to give you a summary of Plato's Symposium or, Foucault's Panopticon or whatever it is you're assigning. So seeing how students are going to be interacting and bringing your content to that search engine, that's going to help you understand what ChatGPT and other generative AI can do. And it's also going to prime you for what you're seeing when you get those reading responses. Maybe it will lead you to the conclusion that you have to update or change some of the assignments that you're giving. This was another one that Billy was really emphasizing in the last session that I think is so important. And I have it highlighted here because this is a time to return to your course objectives and really think about what you're asking students to do and why. Once you have returned to those objectives, those should be guiding your decisions about AI use. How can AI tools help students meet this objective for your course? How might using AI to do this assignment hinder their ability to meet that objective? So for me, someone who has taught a lot of first-year writing, this is a place where I want to create a protected space where students are still going to do some of that writing as process, that writing as struggle. And that means I have to think of ways to protect that objective. If I teach the course again in the fall, I'm thinking I'm going to have them writing in class a lot, right? Ways that I can ensure that they can meet those objectives. I also really like to emphasize, as I already mentioned, that your disciplinary context is so important here. Working with faculty from across our departments, AI is being used differently in psychology than it is in fashion, right? But it's popping up and it's being used in all of those different disciplines. So educating yourself on how your discipline is using it and then letting that guide your practice is something that I would recommend and that we're seeing a lot. I have one colleague who teaches like an intro to psychology class. And so he's asking students to engage with the therapy bots that are proliferating and that are becoming an important, an important tool people might be encountering. So with all of this preliminary work, you would want to then determine your approach. And the policies we're seeing, which we're going to talk about and take a look at on the handout today, are really falling along this spectrum here. We're seeing folks who are saying there are no AI tools allowed in this course, which is not, honestly, it's an approach that is very difficult to police. And it's not necessarily one that we would recommend for all assignments because we're seeing that students are using and engaging with these tools in a range of ways. The far more common one we're seeing is some AI use allowed. And we're breaking that down in a couple of different ways. One being maybe on specific assignments, you're asking them to engage with it, right? The activity that Billy was showcasing in the previous session showed how to use it as a thinking partner, how to ask it questions and then compare your own answers to those questions, right? So having them engage with it in specific ways that are assignment dependent is one approach. And then we're also seeing people use it and recommend that students use it for specific tasks. So you might say, you're going to have 3 papers in this class. You're welcome and invited to use AI as a brainstorming and outlining tool on all of those papers, but you are ultimately responsible for what you hand in and for crafting your own language. And then finally, we have AI use permitted with citation. There are policies out there that I've seen that don't even require citation, but we would definitely recommend just, if you are permitting or embracing AI use, including that citation related piece. Okay. So a couple of tips for getting started. And actually, let me pause here and ask who sees themselves on this spectrum. Raise your hand if you are leaning more towards the no AI tools allowed. Any takers? Great. How about some AI use allowed? Great. And how about AI use permitted with citation? Okay, we've got a lot moving in that direction. Okay, so once you've decided kind of where you're headed on that spectrum, a couple of tips for crafting this policy. So first, you want to share your intent. What values and approaches ground your AI policy and why? And I think you can do this in two different ways. You can absolutely include it in the policy itself, and some of the examples that we'll take a look at in a bit do that, right? You also can just have an incredibly simple policy, as some of our examples do, that say you can use this sometimes or you can't use this. But then give them that framework in your class through discussion, right? Have that conversation with them. I like to say that the best teachers that I know always tell students what they're doing and why about everything. And this is no exception, right? Why is this your policy? Why are you doing this, right? Giving students the chance to come along with you and reflect that meta reflection on what they're doing in your class and why. I would also encourage you to model an ethic of transparency and disclose your own AI use to students, right? We have a strong secondary ed and elementary ed program on our campus, and this is one of the places where I'm seeing faculty adopt the most. Teachers are overworked and under-resourced, and a lot of them are using AI to produce quizzes, create curriculum, lesson plans. Talking to students about when you as a faculty member are doing that helps to create that culture of transparency with them. This tip is one that is kind of not as, I feel like the urgency of this, we're kind of settling into AI. It's not as disruptive as it was, a semester or two ago. But I think you should feel comfortable updating your policies mid-semester, right? If something isn't working for you, talk to students about it, update the policy assignment to assignment, or feel free to make that addendum to your syllabus, right? You can respond to this in whatever way works for you. I already mentioned, you can keep it simple. You can point elsewhere if needed. Thinking about your policy as a way of guiding that meaningful conversation. I've also seen some policies, there's one in the handout here where faculty invite their students to co-write that policy with them. And oftentimes in the ones I've seen, students are really thinking critically about how much using AI works with their learning and supports it, right? Or might not. So inviting them to be collaborators. Yeah, and so these last three I'll just populate together, connecting with conversations about citation practices in your discipline. Connect to disciplinary engagement with AI and start a departmental conversation. Because as I was emphasizing, AI is affecting departments so differently. Having a sense with your colleagues at a department meeting of how you are approaching AI in your major, right? This can be really vital to having that broader conversation about those norms, about those changes for your field specifically. Okay, so finally, just questions to consider here. I think that these are big takeaways that you can use to guide you and stay with you as you're crafting this policy, right? So the first is, does your AI policy help students develop as writers, thinkers, and creators, or does it hinder this development? The equity question is huge in this space too. So do students have equitable access to these tools? Recently, just a week ago, OpenAI released GPT-4o, and in so doing, it made many of its premium features available in the free version. So if you haven't played with ChatGPT in a while, I would recommend going back and seeing what new things it could do. In the literary context, previously, it could not write poems that didn't rhyme. So the free version would only write you a rhyming poem. This was a great way for creative writing faculty, of whom my husband is one, to identify the fact that students use ChatGPT to do their assignments. Now, however, ChatGPT is a better poet. So if previously you would tell ChatGPT, no, that poem rhymes. Can you write me one that doesn't rhyme? It would say, yes, sure, no problem. And then it would write you another rhyming poem. It no longer does that. It actually will not rhyme. So circling back up here, do students have equitable access? Some people might have the paid version, some might not. Just being aware of those different features and what you might be seeing. And also, if you're requiring the use, you're thinking about that equity access, right? And you're also thinking about whether or not you're asking students to sign up for an account that might use their data in different ways. Okay. And finally, are you able to evaluate student work equitably without giving unfair advantage to those who use versus those who do not use AI tools? Okay. We do know that Turnitin, for example, offers a detector for AI tools, but these are very unreliable and they can only be used as an initial basis for a conversation with students about expectations and whether or not they're using those tools. So when you're grading, when you're evaluating assignments, having created a policy that allows you to navigate that space equitably is really important. Okay. So we have our spectrum of approaches here. And what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to turn to their handout now. If you're online, you're going to take a look at the spectrum of approaches that are available in these policy statements. And again, I have this virtual version of the handout available through the QR code here. I'm going to ask you to read over some of these policies. I'm going to finally stop talking for a few minutes. And I want to hear back from you about these first two questions first. Which approach to AI are you considering? We'll hear a little bit more from folks along that spectrum. And I want you, when you're looking at the handout, to identify one or two sample policies that really appeals to you. And we can kind of share and look at those as a group. So again, I'll finally quiet down. Take about three to 5 minutes to just scan through these policies. Which one do you like? What position are you considering? It is in the presentation. I don't have the link up. I can actually probably copy it from here. So if you were to use the QR code, let me see. Oh, it says she has it. This is previous. Okay, let's see. And let me put up to the QR code to the presentation again as well. Yes, sorry about that. All right, the presentation links and the handout links should be in the chat now. All right, let's take about 1 more minute to just identify a policy that you like, and then we'll hear from a few folks. All right, let's hear a little bit about what you're seeing. So, who's willing to start us off with a little bit about the approach you're thinking of taking and one of the policies that you liked or found interesting? Please. And if you could say your name and department, discipline, that would be great. Thank you. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And then I will say, so board favorably applies. What
Mhm.
does it mean favorably?
Mhm.
And
Right.
I tell them that I don't talk like that, I don't talk like that, stop. Okay?
Right.
So for that reason, I'm not against, but be aware that for Dan and the AI. I have do not power of humanity knowledge to the machine. I'm not against machines, they should help us. Me. So that's where the one that says here, can you
Mhm.
what? Here, what you got, what who's organized, presented the way of saying, I use this.
Mhm.
I'm not.
Mhm. Excellent. I know we can't hear in the chat, or is there a chat comment?
Like to maybe make a verbal comment.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead, jump in online. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Or can we?
Thanks, John. Hi, Rachel. Dana Selkowski at SUNY Orange. How are you?
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thank you. Thanks for the overview is fantastic. And I've been going back and forth with the policy approaches and kind of our faculty and giving them options and seeing where they land. But I actually am reviewing and revising my Com 101 course, which is communication skills, public speaking, et cetera. And I'm vacillating between 2 and 3 of, in certain circumstances, really giving them guidance and actually making them use it, forcing them to use it with specific context, so that they learn how to use it also from a critical thinking point of view, but also encouraging them to use it all the time, just citing them and requiring them to think about how they're using it and giving them every opportunity to use it as much as possible. Again, discipline specific, it's communication skills. So they still have to talk. They still have to learn how to speak. Writing speeches is hard. Using tools is helpful. We all have tools. So I'd like them to use it. So I'm going to go back and forth this summer between those two.
That's so great. Yes. And I think that we're seeing that so much that, again, students are using them and they are really welcoming to us for us to help them do that. Right. So having that built into your policy, but also making that distinction between critical engagement, I think is so important. Other folks in the room, and I'm actually going to just bring the mic over if you don't mind, because then our online folks can hear you and I don't have to do a poor job of, summarizing.
Douglas Hemphill, instructional designer from SUNY Oswego. So I don't actually teach a course, but I am the chair of our our academic quality and intellectual integrity committee. So I'm looking at universal policies, but the one that jumped out to me was actually the UT Austin CTL under generative AI use in specific contexts, because of how much it looks at why and how your students are using AI. And in a lot of conversations that I'm having with faculty, particularly those that are worried about academic honesty with the use of AI, this is extremely interesting information for them because it helps them understand why students are using it in a way that they might consider academically dishonest, why the student thinks that thinks that action is okay, and also gives them hints for what to look for in other assignments.
And is there a sentence or two that you would pull out of there that you liked?
Well, it's kind of a long statement, but because it really is the whole section on using AIs on assignments, add an appendix showing all of these different things. And the reason that one jumped out to me was the level of detail and breadth that he was looking, or sorry, I don't know if it was a he, that they are looking at in terms of the AI use, instead of just saying, hey, tell me why you used AI. Tell me where and how you used AI. There's a why component in there that I think is very interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Did you want to jump in? Yeah, please.
Hi. I was most interested in that same one, but the part about different colored font. Now, being an APA disciplinarian of sorts, this is not allowed. So I would have to be open-minded about that. However, I think it would give students a really interesting visual on what is their words, what is their language, what is their ideas, and how they're interacting with the AI. And it would also give me, as the instructor, a pretty good way to figure out what is theirs and what kind of information they own and what they are borrowing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that policy, and what page is it on? I know I didn't number, but page 3, that policy on page 3 cracks me up a little bit too, because it, from a student's perspective might seem to be more permissive, right? It's like, go ahead, use AI. And then it's like, but you need to document and explain and have a footnote and cite. And, you know, a student might be like, actually, I'll just write it myself. Thank you. Right. I mean, it's about the amount of labor that it's kind of asking them to show and prove. But I think there's a positive to that, again, kind of critical engagement that we're encouraging.
There are a couple comments that came through in the chat. Someone said, I would like to use generative AI use permitted or encouraged with citation. Students will use AI, and with some guidelines and proper citation, it can be a great resource. Another participant said, I like the Colorado state policy developed with students in developmental writing courses. Those students have lower literacy skills and need more time to develop critical thinking skills before diving into the tech or else risking dependency. Having said that, liking a no AI policy, I'm leaning towards allowing it with citation, but adding that students should discuss it with me in workshop time first. Show me why you need to use it, and I will help guide you to cite it, that sort of thing. And our last comment is, I like the Clemson policy partially written with AI that emphasizes understanding the limitations as well as the uses of AI.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I also really like our online participant, that Colorado state policy on the first page that is co-authored with students for a comp course. And one of the sentences that I really like here is, right, they say, while the ever-changing and exciting new developments with AI will find their place in our workforces and personal lives, in the realm of education, this kind of technology can counteract learning. This is because the use of AI diminishes opportunities to learn from our experiences and from each other, to play with our creative freedoms, to problem solve, and to contribute to our ideas in authentic ways. In a nutshell, college is a place for learning, and this AI simply cannot do that learning for us. So what I like about that as an example of leaning toward that side of the spectrum where you are trying to prohibit it all the time, or in some contexts, you're talking with students about why. Students are actually putting that in their own voice here, and they're taking a collective agency in why they don't want to use it in this context. I also really like the way this policy, I'm sure with the guidance of an instructor leading these conversations, differentiates between the educational setting and the workplace setting or the personal setting, right? Again, I think that, and this is why it's so disciplinary, the relationship of our courses to the private sector is very different, and it's fraught across the university. People imagine the purpose of the university very differently depending on where they sit within it. And so a policy like this coming out of a Comp 100 class, it situates that class in that larger context, which I think is really valuable. Let's hear from, I think that we probably don't necessarily, well, I'm wondering if we should draft. I think we should just talk a little bit more in the last 5 minutes rather than having you draft your own work. So I'll come over here, and then, you know, we can hear from a couple more folks just in these last few minutes we have.
Sorry, this is a clarifying question about that co-authored one. Do you know, was that something where the faculty member gathered some students separately, wrote it up, and then uses it in multiple classes? Or was this actually an assignment in the class where, you know, the first day of class, they said, hey, we're going to design our intellectual policy for the class? And I just was wondering if you knew which it was.
Unfortunately, I do not, because I literally just stole it from a website. Yes, repurposed. But, you know, it was up on Colorado State's website in their sample policy section. At the end of this presentation, I have a lot of links to different universities' sections, so you might be able to find out more if you reached out to them. Maybe let's just hear from one or two more folks to conclude. Is there anyone who liked a policy in the embracing it category, that final category, that would want to talk a little bit about that? Or even just one more person willing to share what they found interesting before we wrap?
So I thought the one on page 3, the third one down in generative AI use permitted or encouraged with citation from UT Austin. I thought this was an interesting one because it opens with designers commonly use AI content generation tools in their work. I think situating students' use of the tool with professional use of the tool in the field that they're going to be working in is really helpful. And then I also like that there's some kind of reflection included in that policy as well. So they have to include a paragraph that explains what tool they used, the dates they used it, the prompts they used, and then also describing how they transformed source content. So I think there's a lot of reflection built in there, but it's all positioned within this idea that people in your field will be using this tool. So we want you to learn how to use the tool in these specific ways.
I really like that one too. And I also like how you could actually scaffold that, what you were just describing. You could teach students how to do each step of that and do it with them in class, have them, put a reading in, take a look at the output, critically reflect on that, so that then when you're asking them to do that final paper or assignment, you have built those steps and you have done it as a class and you have worked up to it looking at the tools. Okay, so we'll conclude there. And let me just ask in closing, can you raise your hand if you feel a little better equipped to either compose or revise your AI policy leaving this session? Great. Yes. And I guess that was like a mandatory compliment. So apologies. But okay. Well, I'm happy to talk more after or throughout the conference. And thank you for joining me today.